How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. This is the last podcast you'll ever need about the Muppet movie. And I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
Hey, I'm your other host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you so much for joining us for part 4 of our coverage of the films of Jim Henson in our series we've titled Heartfelt, The Legacy of Jim Henson.
All right, so if you've been listening so far, there's been a lot of stuff's already happened on Jim Henson.
25 years worth of stuff?
Previously on Jim Henson. He made Sesame Street. He's made the Muppet Show. So we're starting here, 1978 is where we're at. And by the start of 1978, the Muppet Show was about halfway through its second season, about maybe a third of the way through its second season. But the second season was well underway after becoming one of the most widely watched television programs in the world by the end of its first season. Sesame Street, which Jim Henson helped bring to global prominence, was in its 9th season. Henson Associates had offices and Muppet workshops in both New York and London, and had grown from a company of 2, Jim and his wife Jane, to more than 70 people. Jim Henson, as he was always confident that he would, had become a success, bringing joy to millions of people around the world.
I know we mentioned that last time, and I finally got to the part in the biography where it talked about that, where he was leaving somewhere and the driver asked him, like, are you surprised by the success of all of this or something? And he was like, well, the truth of that answer is no, not really. I always knew I'd be successful at whatever I did. I just happened to choose Muppets. He was like, if anything, I'm just more disappointed that it took as long as it did.
Yeah. I mean, he's been working at this for a long time. I mean, even the Muppet Show took him like a decade and a half or so almost to bring to fruition, because nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to roll the dice on a puppet show that wasn't just like a children's television show.
But he believed the whole time, and I guess that's that good parenting or whatever. But he,
well, yeah, I mean, that's what we talked about way back in episode 1. His grandmother, remember
grandmother, right?
Grandmother Dear, she like always told him like, you can do whatever you want to do, and she, encouraged him to make his art and to tell dumb jokes with bad puns and just do whatever made him happy. And she instilled a confidence in him that you are special, but not in the way that some parents seem to tell their kids they're special and unearned.
Yeah,
that sounds shitty. You know what I mean? Though, like this kid clearly had talent, and she was cultivating it. It wasn't like she was telling a kid he was good at art who clearly was like, this kid needs to not be an artist. This kid needs to be a doctor or something.
There's a weird fine line of the kid that's going to bust out a puppet and start talking to it in the cafeteria. Like, that's not going to be a cool kid in school.
But he was. That's the thing. He was like a ladies man. Like,
I know, that's what I'm saying. And somehow he does it. And you watch him in all these interviews. Like, I've seen him on Carson several times now, and he just walks on with, Dr. Teeth, and he just is getting interviewed, and it's like no thing, and everybody just accepts it and talks to Dr. Teeth. Like, the time that this movie is happening, the Muppet Show is the highest rated syndicated show in the United States.
Yeah.
And it had, like, I think over 200 million viewers, at least over 100 countries. And it's just insane.
Yeah, I think by the end of season 1, they were looking like I think we said it last time. I think it was 162 million people, and that's at the end of season 1. And it only grew in popularity as it continued to go.
Well, and I think this was like at season 3 or like right at season 3, right?
Yeah. So when the movie came out it was season 3. While they're working on the movie, it's kind of like the realm of season 2 to 3. Like he's kind of doing everything all at once, as Jim Henson often did. So he's, with the Muppet Show, like you said, it's huge. Sesame Street is still huge. It's almost a decade into its run. So he had conquered television. He really had, which is what he had always set out to do. But one realm that he had yet to conquer was the big screen. As we mentioned in that last episode, he had directed and produced a handful of short films back in the 1960s, but he hadn't yet made the jump to a full-length feature film. That would soon change as Jim embarked on his most ambitious project to date, one that would bring his beloved Muppets off of the stage and into the real world, and also into cineplexes across the globe. We are talking, of course, about the Muppet movie.
For your consideration, the nominees are for Best Actor,
The lovers, the dreamers.
Kermit the Frog.
I may not be one of your fancy Hollywood frogs, but I deserve a chance.
Best Actress,
You mean it?
Miss Piggy.
I'll be right back. Waka, waka,
Best
waka.
Supporting Actor, Fozzie Bear.
That does it.
And for Best Picture, The Muppet Movie, starring Charles Durning and Austin Pendleton. Special guest stars, Edgar Bergen, Milton Berle, Mel Brooks,
Hey, bitch.
James Coburn, Dom DeLuise, Elliot Gould, Bob Hope,
Peach fudge.
Madeline Kahn,
Buy me a drink?
Carol Kane, Cloris Leachman, Steve Martin,
Yes.
Richard Pryor, Telly Savalas,
Get what?
Orson Welles, and Paul Williams. The Muppet Movie. More entertaining than humanly possible.
I hear this movie is dynamite.
Folks, the movie is over 40 years old. We're going to talk about it in depth. If you've listened to the stuff so far in this series, we're not known for leaving stones unturned. So if you haven't seen this movie by now, that is on you. So this is your spoiler warning. Please do yourself a favor. Go watch the Muppet movie.
That includes the huge weird ending with Kermit and Gonzo and Fozzie and Piggy, the one that Frank Darabont ripped off for the end of The Mist. But this is the Muppets and the Studebaker.
Yeah.
Same thing.
I was gonna make a joke about Fozzie and Kermit actually being the same guy.
Oh yeah.
So before we move on, we do want to remind everyone once again about Cinema Shock Plus. That is our members-only club. You call it a club? I don't know. It's a weird.
Yeah, it's kind of a club.
Sure. Okay.
The members-only club makes it sound sexy.
I know, it kind of does. Cinema Shock Plus is our members-only site, cinemashock.net/plus. You can join for just a couple bucks a month. $5 a month or so gets you extended episodes. You get episodes early. Those extended episodes will get you all kinds of bonus content, like our further viewing recommendations, our Somebody Needs a Nap thing, where we go through a bunch of reviews that we found on the internet. And sometimes Todd has a Star Trek deep dive, if any of the cast have been in Star Trek, things like that. So if you're into like not just what we're talking about on this show, but some sort of branches off, little bonus content, Cinema Shock Plus is the way to go. Or if you just want to support the show and all the hard work that goes into it. On the highest tier, you also get video content. So if you want to see these recording sessions where we're talking to each other, if you're watching right now, you can see my executive producer, Banjo, right behind me here, being a very good boy. Doing a great job supervising the recording.
He's
today.
sleeping because it takes a while to get us all wrangled together. So he's done his job very well and deserves that now.
No, he deserves it. I think his eyes are open. He's watching us. He's
Oh,
watching
okay.
us.
He's creeping.
He's paying attention. But if you have the video feed, then you can see exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, then you just have to imagine how cute my dog is. So you also get merchandise discounts and all kinds of stuff like that. And we really appreciate everyone who has joined Cinema Shock Plus so far. You guys are awesome. You guys, it really makes us feel special that somebody cares enough about what we do here to throw a few bones our way to help us do it. So cinemashock.net/plus if you want to join.
You get all kinds of special features. It's great. It's lots of cool stuff. Extra special content. Yeah, join us.
Please join us.
We dare you.
That's the way you do it, Todd. You double dog dare them, and then if they don't join, they're a bunch of weenies.
Nobody calls me chicken.
Nobody calls me Yella. All right, so that's okay. Now that's the plug. The plug is over. All right.
Okay.
So you would think that given the massive success of the Muppet Show, which we've talked about, a movie starring the Muppets would be a pretty easy sell, right? You would think so. But you do also have to remember that what Jim was proposing was unprecedented and unproven. Nobody else had ever attempted to make a feature-length movie where the main characters were puppets. I mean, obviously there had been movies with puppets in them before, but never one where the focus of the movie are the puppets, and any human characters are sort of secondary characters. So when he pitched the idea of a Muppet movie to Lord Lou Grade, that was his producer, who helped to get the Muppet Show made, he was surprisingly receptive to the notion, but he did have his reservations about it. Because you see, Jim's concept for the film was to make what he said was, he called it the flip side of the Muppet Show. Not bringing a live guest into the world of the Muppets, but rather taking the Muppets out into the real world. And there was a huge question of whether or not this would work, or how the characters would look in a less controlled environment outside of a studio.
And I don't think Lord Lou's reservations were just with Jim exactly, like his commitment to making it happen. I think he counted on that was always going to hold up. It was also a lot that, in the biography they mentioned, in a world where Disney was cranking out movies for like $1 million a piece, Jim at this point is asking for like $8 million, I think is what he said. So it was shocking a little bit to him too.
Yeah.
Well, he knows Jim's got the creative stuff, but I think it is kind of a dollars and cents, nuts and bolts look of like, okay, yeah, it looks great on a soundstage, but if you're talking about having Kermit and Fozzie driving in a car down a real street outside, how much is that going to cost? So, I mean, that's what a good producer does.
Well, not just how much is it going to cost, but can we do it? Can we?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And how's it? And is it going to look good? It's not going to look shitty,
Yes, absolutely.
So it was decided when they started looking into this, started working on early development of it, it was decided fairly early on that someone other than Jim should direct the film. So while Jim, he had wanted to direct it, I mean, the Muppets were his baby. Of course he wanted to direct it. But, when they made this decision, and I'm not sure exactly who made that decision. I'm assuming it was Lou Grade.
I read at one place, they mentioned Lou Grade and Frank Oz.
Yeah.
But I think, Frank wouldn't have had that power to make that decision.
But he might have,
I think Frank
suggested
helped.
it.
Yeah, I think he helped convince him.
Yeah, so Jim was understandably disappointed in this decision, but I think he understood that having an experienced film director at the helm would only help make this movie a success, especially considering all the technical and logistical challenges that the movie would face. After all, not only had the Muppets never shot outside of their studio in London, which, you can control everything. You can move the sets, you can control the lighting, all this stuff. It's a much more controlled environment, but they had actually never shot any of the Muppet stuff on film because the Muppet Show was shot entirely on tape, which was, the common way to shoot television shows at that time. So they needed someone who had some experience behind the camera on a movie.
Yeah, and one of the reasons when I was reading that thing about Sir Lou and Frank Oz convincing him that they needed an actual director, those very circumstances, they were saying, you have to give so much into performing and developing these techniques that we're going to need for the Muppets interacting with the real world. It's going to take too much time for you to do all of that. You can't direct to.
Yeah, you need to focus on this, like on getting the Muppets to look as good as they could possibly look.
Yeah, and Jerry Jules says in one interview I read with him that, you could tell it bugged him.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerry Jules said he could see it in his face because he knew that same feeling from the Muppet Show, like because he wanted to be the head writer on the Muppet Show.
Yeah, exactly.
Thought he should have been.
Yeah,
but
so he could relate. Yeah,
yeah. So he was like, it was exactly like my situation. But Jim was so like optimistic and stoic with his emotions that you wouldn't have known it just as another member of the cast or crew or whatever. It's funny in the biography you even see that with Jim. I don't know why I just thought of this, except that just how he seems to like keep himself in check around other people. But David Laser telling him about, because during this time or like right before the movie's made is when Don Celine dies. So that was a big part of their crew. He got the call, and when he told Jim that Jim didn't say anything or react really, like his mouth was kind of just open.
Yeah.
And then he said he just kind of firmed back up and was just like, well, we'll see each other again, and just went about his business.
Very optimistic. He also had a pretty rich inner like spiritual life. It feels like he was always, we talked about him doing transcendental meditation. He had some interest in Buddhism and things like that. So Jim's spiritual interests were very interesting. Like he wasn't what I would consider a religious person. He obviously grew up in a Christian Scientist household, but he kind of abandoned that early on in life. But he was, by all accounts, a somewhat spiritual person, even if he didn't subscribe to a single like religious belief, if that makes sense.
They said that like even when he said that, you knew he just meant like, even if he didn't know exactly how it would happen, he just believed that there's a parallel plane or something where will be drawn together again because we
Right.
work together really well. Anyway, I took us off on a tangent, but I'm just saying, Jim took the director thing in stride.
Yeah, right, exactly. And by the way, we've mentioned it on past episodes, but I don't think on every episode, that the biography that Gary is mentioning is by Brian J. Jones. Brian J. Jones is a great writer. He also wrote a great, I think, George Lucas one. But it's just called Jim Henson, A Biography. Fantastic book. It's one of the main resources that we've been using on this series, in addition to all kinds of interviews, like the Vanity Fair piece that I sent you guys, and there's an oral history on IGN, and all kinds of stuff that we've used. But the kind of the spine of a lot of that research has been Brian J. Jones's book. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that again, especially because I actually connected with Brian J. Jones on Blue Sky recently, and he said he was going to listen to the show. So if you're listening, Brian, thank you. We couldn't have done this without you, because that book truly is a fantastic read. Even if you're listening to the show and you just want even more, he goes into much more depth than we could go into here. Each episode would be 6 hours long if we were giving you everything that he gives. It is really fantastic. So the guy that they brought in as the director on this was a guy named James Frawley. Frawley had begun his career as an actor before pivoting to directing in the mid-1960s, when he was hired to helm the TV show The Monkees, during which he used similar fast-paced editing techniques that Henson had used on his own short films of that time period. And over the years, Frawley had directed a handful of television and feature films, including the comedy western Kid Blue, starring Dennis Hopper and Warren Oates, and a movie called The Big Bus, which is kind of a parody of the 70s disaster movies. It starred Stockard Channing. He had a sense of humor, and his sense of humor meshed well with Henson's sense of humor, and it made him kind of the perfect match for the Muppets.
He also seemed to have a respect that Jim was looking for in someone. They mentioned that Jim had dealt with people that didn't seem to appreciate what puppeteers go through, what it takes to handle the Muppets. There was a story about how he had worked with other directors where he made them stand in place and hold their arms over their head for a little while,
just to show them how hard it is. Yeah,
just to get a feeling for how much pain you're going to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did see in some spots that Frawley didn't have a great time, but I couldn't find him exactly saying that. I read an interview with him way later that he seemed pretty happy with everything, and he talks about loving the Muppets and their positivity in a cynical world. Anyway, I know they said he really had a respect for the puppeteers, because there would be cuts where they're buried underground. We'll talk about all this, that he would yell out even instead of cut sometimes, just Muppets relax.
Yeah, so telling him hey, you can bring your arm down for a bit and rest that shoulder. I may have sent you guys these videos, but Adam Savage, Mythbusters, he's got a YouTube channel called Adam Savage's Tested, and he's got several videos from about a year ago where he goes to the Muppet Workshop, or the studio where they're working on the new Fraggle Rock show, and he interviews a lot of the Fraggle Muppeteers, and one of them he talks in depth for about 20 minutes to two of the puppeteers on the Fraggle Rock, and talks to them about the process of that. And they talk about how, they'll be standing there hours at a time sometimes with their hand above their head. And the woman, I can't remember her name, but the performer on there, she said that she made a joke that she went to her chiropractor, and they're your right rib cage is 2 inches higher than the left side. And they had to adjust it, because you're just in that, your body's not made to be in that position for that long,
I think in the biography, they said Frank Oz would be if you ain't into shoulder pain, this ain't the job for you.
Yeah, I know that I read an interview with Dave Goelz, who of course is still playing Gonzo, and he's had to have multiple neck and shoulder surgeries over the years just from doing that. Most of his life, that's what he's been doing. It's a commitment for sure. But James Frawley did seem to at least appreciate that, even if he didn't come from that background.
I will say also his work with the Monkees, that's pretty interesting. Did you know that Chekhov was added to the Star Trek crew in season 2 of the original series because of the fame of the Monkees TV show?
What?
Why? No, why?
Suck it, Todd.
How did
Suck it.
Wait, but what's the correlation there?
Because he was at that time, he had the cool haircut.
Yeah.
And was the younger.
So they just wanted to add a young, cool.
They needed a teenage cool crush for girls and stuff.
And it was Walter Koenig.
It was.
Let me just tell you, Walter Koenig is great with the ladies. He's incredibly charming.
Say what you will, he's been laid.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, once Frawley was on board, one of the first orders of business was to conduct a camera test to see how well the Muppets would work in real life. So Jim, Frank Oz, and Frawley, they took a handful of Muppets out to the English countryside, driving around and occasionally stopping to film anything that looked, kind of interesting. This would be a good spot to shoot some stuff. Sometimes it was out in the country. country. Sometimes it was in little cottages and things like that. So they used Kermit, Fozzie, Piggy, and Animal, having the Muppets pop out from, behind trees and bushes and on fences and things like that. They even, towards the end of it, they even interact with some real cows. And did you guys have a chance to watch this camera test?
Yeah.
It is hilarious. It's so funny. If you have Disney Plus, if you go to the extras section on the Muppet movie, it's on there. It's about 17 or 18 minutes long, and it's clearly it's mostly Jim and Oz performing. It's mostly Kermit and Fozzie. The Piggy, the other characters come in later on, but you can tell they're obviously not scripted. They're just making stuff up as they go and like ad-libbing, and it shows how genuinely funny they both are because it's hilarious. And they say some things that like they would never say on the Muppet Show. Like there's this whole bit about Sweetums accidentally killing some rabbits. And that's really funny. Sweetums is there as well, by the way. Sweetums is great. He's running through fields and things. But Sweetums in it was played by a new puppeteer named Steve Whitmire. Steve Whitmire had joined the Muppet Show a year earlier at the age of 18 years old. Like he joined very, very young. So he's only 19 years old or so when they're doing this camera test. And Whitmire would become a driving force in the Muppets for years. He created Rizzo the Rat. That was his character that he not only performed but created. And he took on the mantle of Kermit and Ernie after Jim Henson passed away. He was the guy that they chose to continue those characters. And he continued playing those characters up until, 2014 or 15. He parted ways with the company. But up until then, for 25 years, he was Kermit the Frog. He was Ernie. So this was kind of one of the first things he was in, was this little camera test. But man, it's well worth watching because I was cracking up watching it. It just at how funny they are and how well Jim and Oz work together. It's really good.
Oh, they're great. Not enough gets said for just how off the cuff they can be and just spontaneously funny.
And they make each other laugh a lot. Because they're, obviously they were filming this thing not with the plan of it being commercially available. So they laugh sometimes, like in character, like they'll make each other laugh, like especially when they start talking to the cows. They come across these cows in a field and start talking to them, and they're just like making each other laugh, and they break character pretty regularly, and it's pretty funny.
I mean, and you get that too. Like, I mentioned Jim Henson on like Carson. The one I watched today was with Dr. Teeth. That's why I mentioned that one. He's ad-libbing, interacting right there with the people on stage with him. And so it's just,
you don't think of Jim Henson as like an improv artist, but he is. In a way. I mean, like when he was on making those talk show appearances, like he had to be. When he was on Arsenio Hall or on Johnny Carson or all these other shows that he was on, he wasn't performing from a script. He's answering these questions on the spot, and he was funny.
I did want to mention that Whitmire, I think in the biography, they also talk about that was a guy, I think last episode we talked about another one that Jane found, but Whitmire was the same. Like Jane had first interviewed him in a restaurant, and they tell the story of her going in there to meet him for the first time, and he had a puppet with him, and they were just like talking, and she wasn't sure what he was going to do with him, but he kind of just like in the middle of talking, like pulled out the puppet and started interacting with her with the puppet. And everybody in the restaurant starts staring. So he's like engaging with people and kids that are around and stuff. And she was like so impressed with how he handled that
being in kind of an awkward situation, an awkward like place to be doing it. Yeah.
And she told Jim, like, this is a guy you need to meet.
And he made a career out of it. So they did this whole camera test. It was deemed a success. And when they showed the footage to Lou Grade, he was impressed enough to make a firm commitment to help finance the film, which was greenlit, as Gary mentioned earlier, on a budget of about $8 million, which was not an inconsiderable sum at the time when most Disney movies were being made for about $1 million. And that's like live action Disney stuff, which were big in the 70s, especially.
A lot of the Don Knotts stuff and
Song of the South.
Yes.
Man, I watched the Don Knotts episode of the Muppet Show the other day, and it's great because he's another one of those like cast members who's like, he basically is a Muppet, you know?
Yeah.
So it just worked. He's just completely on board. His sense of humor works really well with them. It's pretty funny. It's good stuff.
We were watching, my late brother Brad had purchased The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, and it was on my Voodoo account, and last Halloween we watched it, and I thought of Brad while I was watching it just because of course this is what he would pick. But I'm like watching Don Knotts and just like, this motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like, this guy.
It's a great movie. I mean that is a very Brad pick for a movie though. But I love it. I mean, I love that movie. I grew up watching that that one and the Apple Dumpling Gang. My grandmother had both of those on VHS, and I watched both of those pretty regularly when I was a kid. It was those two and Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Those were like the ones. For some reason, my grandmother had all of those on VHS. And Babes in Toyland starring.
Drew Barrymore?
Yeah.
Those are all like all those Don Knotts one especially are like very grandparent tapes.
Yeah. And I knew who Don Knotts was because, as we talked about in the last episode, I grew up watching a lot of Andy Griffith because it's my dad's favorite show. So how do we this is like the fourth episode we've mentioned. We've talked about Don Knotts and Andy Griffith during this Muppet series.
That's a preview for our next series.
The films of Don Knotts.
Sniff really hard.
Where were we?
I'm glad you got that reference, Justin.
He does it on the Muppet Show. Several times. Like in the scene where he's like, it's the talk, where Kermit talks to the guests. It's that scene, and Don Knotts is trying to look all cool, and like that's his like cool guy voice. And keeps doing the sniff thing. Classic Don Knotts. I'm sure all of our younger listeners, if we have any, are like, "What the fuck are these guys talking about?"
I was gonna say he's gonna be as lost to time for like newer listeners.
Not if we can help it.
As most of the guest stars on the Muppet movie are.
Or the Muppet Show, especially.
Oh.
All right, so they've got money. Lord Lou helped them get money. I don't think he put up the full $8 million, but him committing to it and committing a significant sum to it helped them get additional financing and things like that. So with money to make the movie, Henson and his crew immediately got to work on the story for the film. And this story development began with a series of brainstorming sessions at the home of a guy named Paul Williams, who Jim had hired to write the songs for the film. Now, for those who may not be familiar with that name, Paul Williams is I don't think this is hyperbole, but I think he's a legendary figure in songwriting. He wrote songs like An Old-Fashioned Love Song by Three Dog Night, the love theme from A Star Is Born, sung by Barbra Streisand. He does pretty much most of the music from A Star Is Born. Rainy Days and Mondays and We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters, like huge hits in the 70s. And he's also done a lot of work as an actor. Actually, most notably as the villain Swan in Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, for which he also wrote the music, and as Little Enos in Smokey and the Bandit.
Yeah, the guy's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, so he's nobody.
He's still the president of what's the name of the songwriting organization?
ASCAP?
ASCAP? Yeah, he's like the
ASCAP.
president and has been for like the last 20 years, I think.
He's not a lie. I just saw him in Baby Driver not too long ago.
Yeah.
He was in a drug deal in that or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, I also was going to mention, does a lot of voice work too, but Todd probably knows all about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's been doing voice work for a long time, but the big one for me, and if anybody knows me, in addition to being a big Star Trek fan, I'm a huge Batman fan, and Paul Williams is the voice of the Penguin in the original Batman the Animated Series. And if you ever, especially if you watch the episode of the Muppet Show with Paul Williams, if you know the Penguin from Batman the Animated Series, when you watch Paul Williams on the Muppet Show, if you kind of close your eyes, you can almost see the Penguin, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
And he's done some other stuff for DC too, but I think that's the big one is
the Batman the Animated Series, which also features another Star Trek alum, Mark Hamill.
Yes, amongst others.
We're taking all your Star Trek shit today, Todd. We're
and also
up the bingo game.
Let's see. Captain Catherine Janeway, Kate Mulgrew is the voice of Red Claw in Batman the Animated Series. Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and Clayface, Walter
Walter Koenig? No. Although that would be great. That would be great if that was it.
By the way, Phantom of the Paradise, just to throw it out there, we covered that on the old show, so maybe it's in like some of the Cinema Shock Plus stuff someday. That movie's great, and the music in it's great.
It is. Very good movie. So in 1976, Paul Williams had appeared on the first season of The Muppet Show, and he and Henson had gotten along so well that they'd vowed to find another project to work on together. That project came along in 1976, later on that year, when Jim began developing an hour-long Christmas special based on the book by Russell and Lillian Hoban called Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. Yeah, we're talking about it. We didn't talk about it last episode. I promised we would, though. Emmett Otter was a very ambitious project, which required the creation of all new puppets, a family of otters, and was filled with innovations that would inspire future Muppet projects, including some of the first ever radio-controlled puppets, which were built by Muppet tech whiz Faz Fazakis, who we also talked about last week or last episode. Jim's favorite of all of these innovations was a mechanical Emmett that could row and steer a boat in the water. Like he just had fun like playing with the remote control like on set. Like who wouldn't? I would. That sounds like a blast, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was like completely unlike anything that the Muppet Workshop had ever done before. When was the last time you guys watched Emmett Otter? I watched it last Christmas for the first time in probably since I was a kid. I watched it not this past Christmas, but the one before.
I was going to mention I saw it for the first time I'd ever seen it like 2 Christmases ago.
Oh,
and
yeah?
I watched it this past Christmas. I think it's a cute
little movie. It's pretty like melancholy.
Yeah, a little bit.
Say.
A little bit.
It's a little melancholy. It's really sweet though. Puppets are incredible. Honestly. And they don't look like your typical Muppets. They're not shaped like your typical Muppets. They're a little more realistic looking, I guess you could say, or
yeah, that's fair.
Anatomically, like they look like an otter. You know, they don't look like a cartoon as much as some of the other Muppet stuff does. But yeah, I mean, it's a really fantastic little special. So Jim and his Muppet team, when they finished this thing, they were incredibly proud of the work that had been done on it. But it was kind of a tough sell to networks. I don't know why, but for some reason, nobody wanted to pick it up. And it didn't end up airing until December of 1977, where it made its debut on Canadian television more than a year after it was completed. It would be another year before American audiences could see it. And even then, it only showed up on HBO, which at the time was brand new. HBO was a brand new subscription service, had a very small viewership, so not a lot of people were able to see it in America. It wouldn't be seen by most American audiences until it finally aired on ABC in 1980. But over the years, Emmett Otter has become one of Henson's most beloved projects, a perennial favorite that's watched by families every holiday season. And a big part of why it's so loved, I think, is Williams' songs, which I think are perfectly in sync with the sweet nature of the project, but they also show a lot of Williams' versatility. The ballad When the River Meets the Sea, which is sung by Emmett and his mother, really sweet little song. It is as memorable as the rollicking rock and roll song sung by the villainous River Bottom Gang, the like snake, the lizards and snakes who are the bad guys in that. They do this little cool little rock and roll song, and they're both great. And the fact that Williams is able to nail both of those shows just how versatile he really is as a songwriter.
That song sounds like the Sex Pistols if they were like steamboat captains or something that were drunk. But I do love the bass playing Snake in that because it's just a wicked looking puppet. But
also, how does a snake play a bass?
With his tail.
Very carefully.
But somehow, yeah, he makes, I guess, hits the notes just right with the other part of his tail.
Yeah.
So it's weird. Yeah, I don't.
It's kind of like, it makes me think of the snake in the animated Robin Hood. I guess that was the mid to late 60s where he ends up curling up, but like lumps 2 sections of his body.
Like
it looks like
elbows.
And it looks like elbows. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Jim and Paul Williams were clearly a great fit, and Henson wanted to recreate that magic on the Muppet movie. So when Jim asked Williams to join the film, Williams did not hesitate. He was down for it because he'd had fun working on Emmett Otter, and he had fun working on the Muppet Show. His only request was that he would be allowed to bring on his friend Kenneth Asher, a composer that Williams collaborated with regularly.
He thought Kenneth Asher had, obviously they worked together really, really well.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff, like on A Star Is Born, like that was both of them did all that together, and a lot of their songs. But that's another specific movie that they both did together.
Yeah, I think in one interview I saw with Williams, he says that like his melodies are like the most gorgeous you'll find. But also one of the big parts was he wanted to be able to focus on songwriting versus like Asher could score. Yeah, and I never considered it until I was reading that stuff. I bet it is an arduous process.
Yeah,
scoring a film, because just having to hit every part of the movie, like how many times you must have to see scenes and just like nail that down. I've never really considered it before now.
It's a difficult process. It's always kind of fascinating to me when a musician who's not known for film makes that transition, because it feels like such a different process than like writing songs. You know, like Trent Reznor is someone who has done it brilliantly, I think. I mean, I think Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross do some of the best film scores out there right now. Nobody listening to Head Like a Hole in 1993 would have ever thought that this guy would be winning Oscars one day for writing movie scores, or Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, guys like that who have made that transition. It's such a, yes, it's both music, but it's like it feels so different, like a different world of music.
Oh yeah,
almost.
it feels like it would be way much more like, I don't know, it'd be interesting to ask, because I know like Billy Corgan, he did like I know he did like Ransom with Mel Gibson. He scored that movie. I wonder if it's like some people just like they don't have the patience for it, or I don't know.
So when they started all these story meetings, remember they're doing these story meetings at Paul Williams' house. When they started these story meetings, all they knew as far as what the movie was going to be about was that they wanted this to be a road movie like the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby movies of the 40s, where Kermit would pick up all of the other Muppets along the way.
There's a great oral history of the Muppet movie, and I forget what side it's on.
It's on IGN.
IGN, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl Henson in that talks about how this was like a big road trip for her father too, that he was really producing in Los Angeles, the excitement of like renting a house where all these people were going to be. So she said it was like kind of like that was its own movie in itself, and almost mimicking this, just the trip to Hollywood.
Because he had never really produced anything in Hollywood. He had been in Hollywood to appear on variety shows and stuff, but none of his projects were based there.
Maybe that's another movie somebody should make one day.
About the making of this? About the making of the...
all the nerds in that house they rented. Like talking to each other with puppets.
You're selling me on this, Gary. This sounds amazing.
I would watch it. You got to get what's his name from Saturday Night to play Henson, though. He did such a great job. And have you seen Saturday Night yet? I know we've talked about it.
I haven't seen it, so no.
Oh, it's the guy from Succession, Cousin Greg. What's his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but I just can't remember right now. So at these story sessions, the main participants were Jim Williams, Jerry Jewell, David Laser, and Michael Frith, who at this point had become the creative director for Jim Henson Productions. We mentioned him last time. He was the illustrator who came to work for the workshop. Michael Frith is a huge part of everything Jim Henson's company is going to do going forward. But yeah, so he's the creative director, which, is, I mean, that sounds like a big title to me, creative director of Jim Henson Productions. So Frith, in that oral history that you're talking about, Gary, Frith recalled having an epiphany during the first story meeting, something that really kind of helped set things in motion. Not so much from like a story standpoint, because they knew this was going to be a road movie, but more of like an idea standpoint. So here's what he said. I'm just going to read his whole quote because I think it's really fantastic. He said, "It's about us. It's about the Muppets." And when he says the Muppets, I think he's referring to, the Muppet performers, them. They referred to themselves as the Muppets. He says, "It's about this group of, in a way, misfits, these artists and writers and scenic people who seem to come from different worlds, coming together to create something that would not otherwise have been able to be created. The gathering of this clan becomes something greater than the sum of its parts." He kind of nailed it there, honestly, with what the movie was about.
In getting a little bit ahead, I won't let the cat out of the bag, but getting ahead, and I was thinking about further viewing, like this movie's so iconic, man, and then I was like, oh, well, it's a road trip movie. I was like, well, yes, but it's a little more than that. And to encapsulate that quote, it's chasing your dreams. They are chasing their dreams. And it's such a pure and wholesome thing that it ends up speaking to anybody and everybody. And it goes back to what I was talking about a few episodes ago when we were doing the introduction stuff, when I asked you guys if this is nostalgia proof. I think this lends to it. Who hasn't wanted to hop in their car with their buddy and go chase their dream? Like, you kind of know that feeling.
Well, after this meeting, Paul Williams and Jim Henson are kind of walking out to their car, and Paul turns to Jim and he said, "Hey, listen, we know this is a big deal, so we're going to let you hear all the songs that we're working on as we're working on them to make sure that we're headed in the right direction." And Jim replied to him, he said, "Oh, Paul, that won't be necessary. I'll just hear them in the studio." Like, he had complete faith in Paul Williams to write these songs. And I think that's really interesting because it does show Jim's faith not only in the people that he's working with, but in his own ability to choose the right people.
Yeah.
I guess that's the confidence part of it, because I was trying to think of who have we dealt with so far in any of these series that is that trusting. Mm-hmm. And again, probably the closest you're going to get is somebody like a David Lynch, who seemed to have, certain people that he seemed to like.
Well, yeah, and he just got a vibe off of people. Yeah, because David Lynch didn't really do auditions. He just met with people, and if you fit what he was looking for, you fit. So he just kind of trusted the process. And Jim Henson's kind of the same way, but on on a different creative level. Like same way with the way that he chooses his Muppet performers. Like he just gets a feel for them, it feels like, and knows instinctively if they're going to fit.
Yeah, but it's a big deal to like get to the point that you're even now making a movie. And the music is obviously going to be huge.
I mean, this is a
huge
musical
part of it. Yeah. So, and just to be like, no, I've already got the right person, so I know that part's covered. I don't have to think about it.
I mean, he knows Paul Williams could write a song, obviously.
Well, and I think it speaks to a lot of the directors that we've discussed on the show. You can see that they work with the same people over and over again. Obviously, they like their work and they trust them. If something happens where, I mean, they're all artists, and artists grow and evolve and change over time. But like, you can look at any particular, look at a Sam Raimi film. You can probably rattle off half the people, or at least half a dozen or more, that are on almost every single one of his pictures, because he knows them. He knows their work and trusts them. It's astounding that off the bat, working with Paul Williams, I guess his reputation preceded him, or
well, I mean, they had worked on Emmett Otter, so he had at least
some sort of basis for that decision. But yeah, like to just say, no, yeah, you're good, I trust you. I mean, that speaks a lot to Jim and to Paul.
Oh yeah,
about their talent and their vision.
And it's one thing for like people to have people that or for directors or creative staff, people that they work with and trust that they're going to get the vibe right, or what we're looking for. Generally, I feel like most of the directors and stuff that we ever talk about, though, still would want to see the dailies or would want to hear the music,
right?
That's happening. For Jim Henson to just be like, nah, it's cool.
I'm sure. I'm sure it'll
I'll hear
be fine
when I hear it.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be fine.
It's like that's like another level of like just like I'm not even gonna worry about that part for right now.
I got other things to worry about. That's why I hired you, basically.
Yeah.
So with a story concept decided upon, a script quickly began to come together, with the earliest versions written by Jack Burns, who had been the head writer on the Muppet Show's first season. Burns's quick rat-a-tat style of joke delivery lent itself very well to the Muppets, as anyone who's seen the Muppet Show can attest. But nobody ever really understood the Muppets as characters the way that Henson's longtime writing partner Jerry Jewell did. So after Burns had written his draft, Jewell was brought in to polish it up, and the final writing credit goes to both Burns and Jewell. So while all of this developments happening, Henson was still working like a madman on a variety of other projects, like he always was. He wasn't just working on the Muppet movie, because this is Jim Henson we're talking about, right? He would regularly fly from New York, where his Muppet workshop was, to Los Angeles, where the film was being developed, sometimes twice a week, going back and forth across the country, while occasionally hopping over to London, where he was planning the next season of the Muppet Show. So he's all over the place. And there was another gestating project that had caught his attention as well. See, a few months before work on the Muppet movie began in earnest, Jim had begun talking with a British fantasy artist named Brian Froud about collaborating on an as yet unknown fantasy film unrelated to the established Muppets. This was going to be something completely new. Now, we'll be talking about that movie in full later in this series. If you are familiar with Jim Henson's work, you could probably guess what it is. But this is just kind of another example of just how many plates Henson often had spinning at once. He was, as always, thinking of the next thing.
Yeah, and even in the case of, again, with people that he works with, you mentioned he's working on the stuff for Brian Froud, or with Brian Froud, for another project. I was reading that David Odell is a screenwriter, that when the Muppet movie is happening just later on, I guess there are cameos that they had intended on that ended up getting changed for whatever reason, and like certain celebrities. Anyway, they end up changing the script, I think a couple of times, but David Odell's the screenwriter who comes in to help him fix those, and they click, and that ends up being the guy who's going to write this other project we're talking about.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Very cool. So meanwhile, Paul Williams and Kenny Asher, they start working on all the songs, and they wrote them chronologically, which I thought was interesting. I don't know why they did that, but I thought it was an interesting way to go about it. Instead of just seeing what came to them, they decided, hey, we're going to put one here, here, here. I don't know how music and like musicals, I don't know if that's normal or if that's weird, but it sounded interesting to me, or odd to me. So doing it chronologically, they start with The Rainbow Connection. So from the get-go, they knew that they wanted to start the film with Kermit's what Paul Williams called his I Am song, a song that, in Williams' words, would show that Kermit has an inner life, a spiritual life, kind of showing you what Kermit's thinking, like what's going on inside of this guy. The model that they used was When You Wish Upon a Star, the song that opens up Disney's Pinocchio. But aside from that, the only other thing that they had to go off of was the direction from Jim that the movie would open on Kermit in a swamp. And when Paul Williams asked what he would be doing, Jim's like, he's going to be playing a banjo. And that was it. Why? I don't know. I mean, Kermit had played the banjo on the Muppet Show a few times. Jim liked the banjo. Have you seen the skits on the Muppet Show with the three, like it's the band of the three guys and one of them looks like Jim Henson?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
And one looks like Frank Oz, and I think the other one is Jerry Jewell. I think that's who they're all modeled after. But the Jim Henson one plays a banjo. Jim just like the banjo. I actually found a article on like the National Banjo Foundation or whatever website about Jim Henson because the banjo is used so much in his work. I thought that was funny. So that's what they started from. They knew Kermit's going to be playing a banjo. And of course, the first chords that we really hear in that scene are the plucking of the banjo strings. So Williams and Asher wrote most of this song pretty quickly, but they got stuck when it came to the title. The first verse starts with, they wrote all this pretty quick. It starts with, why are there so many songs about rainbows and what's on the other side? And they kind of went from there and talked about how, it kind of talks about how rainbows are not real. It's not like a real magical thing, but we create this magic in them with our thoughts. That's kind of what the song's about. So they worked through all this and kind of wrote themselves into a corner a little bit. And they were trying to find a connection between these rainbows they were talking about and the people that created the rainbows. So they kept trying to, they're like, we're stuck. They're sitting at the dinner table just like, what the hell are we going to call this song? And in this interview with Vanity Fair, which is a great interview, it's just about the creation of the Rainbow Connection. Williams recalled that his wife at the time, she overheard Asher and him having this conversation. And she's like, you have said the phrase Rainbow Connection like 5 times while you've been trying to figure this out. Why don't we just call the song the Rainbow Connection? And that's kind of how it came about, because his wife, I think, got tired of hearing him complain about it. So in that same Vanity Fair interview, Williams also recalled a really magical moment from the recording sessions for this song. I really loved the story that he told. So they brought Jim Henson in to record the song, and he sang a couple of takes in the recording booth in Kermit's voice, obviously, but it wasn't quite working. Something was off. Something was missing. And then someone pointed or someone suggested, and Williams couldn't remember who made this suggestion, but somebody who was there in the studio at the time made a suggestion that Kermit should try a take. So Henson brought out the Kermit puppet, which I guess he just carries with him everywhere, probably.
Yeah, Why wouldn't you?
So he brings out the Kermit puppet, and he recorded another take performing Kermit on his hand. And Kermit, according to Williams, sang it brilliantly. And that was the take they ended up using in the movie.
Wow. That's
Isn't that
awesome. Great? Yeah.
So other songs written for the film included Moving Right Along, which is this great road trip montage with Kermit and Fozzie. It will get stuck in your head. Almost more than any other song in the movie. I think Moving Right Along is a real earworm. There's I Hope That Something Better Comes Along, which features Rolf the dog at his most Tom Waitsy-est, in my opinion.
Yes.
He makes a joke right before singing the song where it's like, I go home, walk myself, have a beer, and go to bed. And that sounds like something Tom Waits would have been sitting at the piano saying. It sounds like something from Nighthawks at the Diner, like that kind of joke. It really does. Anyway, it's a great song. There's Can You Picture That, which is sung by Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. And all these songs are like so different in style, which this shows you just how good Paul Williams is. Like they're so different. And then of course there is Never Before, Never Again, which is a ballad sung by Miss Piggy.
I did want to throw in there too that one of the big things with I Hope That Something Better Comes Along, you get Rolf and Kermit in the same scene, and those two don't appear together a lot.
I've been wondering about this. I'm wondering if you found something about how this was done, because I don't know.
Because it's both Jim Henson.
Right.
And so, they're doing a duet, so that's not a thing that, he's one guy. And
I mean, obviously the vocals you can just record in the studio on 2 different tracks, but
that's what they did. Yeah, they did do that. But to control both, he would need like 3 hands, because Rolf usually has him with like a right hand and doing the mouth, and then another puppeteer is controlling his left hand, and Kermit's one hand.
But Kermit's really 2 hands, because he's the one hand and then he's the rod.
Yeah, so maybe it needs like 4 hands really to be able to pull this off. So, but
plus an extra person.
Something I was reading and I don't remember them saying for sure who it was, but I wonder if it was Whitmere. He actually handed off Kermit to someone else during that scene.
So Jim was doing Rolf.
So he did Rolf, and someone else handled Kermit, and it was. I remember whatever I was reading was from it. It was a rare instance that Jim was like, "All right, you take Kermit." And And it was kind of interesting. And they did that. He recorded Rolf's track and would play it back and sing Kermit's part or whatever. And
that must have been felt like such an honor to be the puppeteer that
I was about to say.
If
it had been me, I'd just been like, okay, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry.
And he like presents Kermit to you and it's glowing. It's like the angels are singing.
But he doesn't present it to you. He just like throws it across the room.
Yeah, Jim doesn't give a shit. Like it's just a piece of felt.
I was because we talked about that last time, I think, and you had mentioned how Jim wasn't precious about it, and I had gotten to that part of the biography too, where I think it was Laser or Jewel were talking about they were so precious with them, and they apologized if they like dropped them on the ground or something. You know, they would tell Jim that, and he would just kind of smile and move on. Whatever.
Nothing to him.
But like David Laser would get mad because like during this time, like because of the Muppet Show and everything, the popularity of it, like this had become a mecca for Muppet fans. So like people were coming in all the time, and he would get like precious about that. Don't take pictures of them while they're dead.
Yeah,
you know,
like hanging on the wall.
Yeah, he didn't want people taking pictures of the Muppets like not lifelike.
Yeah,
and
Jim didn't care.
But Jim didn't give a shit. So
because like I said, like he threw some of his salmon friends ones like in a toy box for his kids. He's like, I'm done with these. You guys can they're just your toys now. Like he didn't want to put them in a museum, which they're all in a museum now. But you know, so the last song that I mentioned in that list was Never Before, Never Again, the Miss Piggy song, which is so funny. It plays over this daydream montage after Piggy sees Kermit for the first time and immediately falls in love at first sight. And it's a great montage. It references like Casablanca and like it's some other movies. It's really funny. But it was originally recorded by Johnny Mathis, and I guess they were just going to play Johnny Mathis's vocals over that song. But then Jim decided
like
that it
Miss
would
Piggy singing as Johnny Mathis.
No, it's like just Johnny Mathis. Like it was just going to be playing over the scene. Nobody's singing it. It's just playing
like soundtrack.
Yeah. But then Henson decided that it would be funnier if Miss Piggy sang it herself, and he was right because her like Frank Oz's performance in that scene is so funny because she sings like kind of off key, especially at the end when she has to hit like the high notes, like when the just married like car is pulling away, and oh my gosh, it is. I rewatched it this morning, and that scene just is hilarious to me. And it would have been kind of, I mean, it is a little cheesy, and it would have been really cheesy if Johnny Mathis had sang it, but by having Piggy sing it becomes a comic scene, like a much funnier scene. You know, that Mathis did end up performing it on this thing called The Muppets Go Hollywood, which was a TV special produced to help promote the movie's release. We'll probably talk about that a little bit later on, but it was like this 1 hour TV thing, and Johnny Mathis comes on there and sings it live. It's kind of corny because it's Johnny Mathis. I watched it, and it's the Piggy version's better.
Yeah.
Miss Piggy did actually attempt to perform the song again on the 4th season of The Muppet Show with Rolf at the piano, but she deliberately sabotaged the performance because she wanted to go perform with Christopher Reeve, who was the guest on that episode. So she like slammed. I think if I remember right, she like slams the thing on Rolf's fingers while he's playing the piano on accident on
right.
So another song that was kind of a late addition to the film was Gonzo's ballad, which is called "I'm Going to Go Back There Someday." This song was not originally in the script, but Williams was inspired by this moment written into the film where Gonzo is longingly looking into the desert sky. And Williams, he talks really sweetly about this. He says that something kind of awakened in his mind during this moment. He saw an opportunity to further develop Gonzo's character with a song. And Williams has said, I've read it in 2 or 3 interviews where he's mentioned that Gonzo is his favorite Muppet. Like he just feels a kinship with Gonzo. And he sees Gonzo as, he described him as a landlocked bird. And in this song, he saw it as a chance to write about Gonzo longing to fly again. So after writing the song...
I'm not going to start crying.
After writing the song, Williams offered it to Henson, and Henson worked it into the movie because he loved it so much. So they had to, of course, present it to Dave Goelz and have him perform it. But it is a wonderful little song, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I excuse myself from the room when that's on. It's just
and
like
Goelz's performance of it is so good.
Yeah.
Like the way Gonzo does not have like a great singing voice because he's got a weird voice. I don't know. That song is really precious to me, I think.
Yeah.
Paul Williams is a skydiver also, just to add to his resume. So he said in one interview that basically he thought of it. I forget exactly the right words. He said he looked at these people and thought of them as family, and something about that scene with Gonzo, like looking off, it just made him think about that and looking into the sky. And just, he talked about when he was a skydiver, how you'd feel like you're flying and you're free and and I don't know. He said it just like all started to come to him, and he felt a connection to Gonzo, like that was his favorite character. And so that he's, like you said, a landlocked bird, and that his girlfriend's a chicken. He's like these birds that are kind of stuck, that want to get lost in the heavens or something, is the way he described it. It was very majestic the way he described it. But and Dave Goles tells the story that he had not seen this in the script or anything, and they were just having dinner with Jim at his house or something one evening before they started shooting. He said, "Oh, by the way, there's a song for Gonzo now," and he played the song for him, and he said it was just like tore him up. Like, it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And Dave Gold says, then we went to the studio and the music had all been recorded. Everything had been done already. Paul had set it up, and they were just ready for me to just jump in there and do it. But it was done in a key that he sings in. And I
cannot hit those notes.
He's like, it was out of my, what everybody laughingly calls my range. So he was like, and I felt like such a huge failure, because I was like, I can't do that. But they ended up having the people come back in and just like redo the song in a different key. Hit. Yeah. And then just to make it even more beautiful, he sings that song at Jim's memorial.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
God damn it.
Fuck. That's just wild. A funny tidbit to like raise us back up from that just real quick is that Jim Henson legitimately was not aware, speaking of Gonzo, was not aware of Bollywood at the time, really. And so it was supposed to be funny that Gonzo wanted to go to India to make movies, and it was supposed to be like, why would you do that? And it said it wasn't until like after the movie came out that he realized that like
it's the second biggest movie.
Well, they were saying like Bollywood probably put out like twice as many movies a year than Hollywood was.
Yeah.
So they were like, that joke didn't work.
Yeah, it's still pretty funny though, because of Fozzie's reaction, where he's like, looks like we picked up a weirdo, and so it works pretty well. But yeah,
with that song, it kind of puts a different spin on the scene with Gonzo and all the balloons, because the whole time he's in the air, it's just whoopee, oh, everything's so beautiful, like it just adds a little extra layer to it.
Sets the stage for Muppets in Space a little bit too.
That was my thought too. Oh yes.
Yeah. There's also that great shot of the shooting star when Kermit's after the song, but in the later part of that scene, after Kermit's talking to himself, and you get that shooting star, which was also kind of an improv moment. Like, it wasn't in the script, I don't think. I think they just decided on the day of to add that. I think it was Jim's idea, and I think they literally added like some kind of light to a string and just flung it across the set, kind of thing. It starts a trend of shooting stars in Muppet movies.
Well, I had read somewhere, I mean, maybe we'll talk about this later on, but I read somewhere that the shooting star, especially after Jim passed away, the shooting star became the presence of Jim Henson. Yeah. Like they included it as like, and here's
an homage,
Jim.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I can't remember where I read that, but I was like, damn it, even reading this, I'm gonna start crying.
Todd's just aching to cry.
I'm very tender-hearted, guys.
I think Todd just needs a good cry.
I might.
Maybe today's the day.
Yeah.
The Muppet movie shot for 87 days over the summer and fall of 1978, with most exterior scenes filmed in California's San Fernando Valley or a few in New Mexico, while interiors were shot at CBS Studios in Studio City. Now, this shoot, as you can imagine, was fraught with challenges, not only the challenges of shooting a fairly low-budget film on location, but doing so with dozens of puppets as your main characters, something that had never been attempted before. You see, on the set of The Muppet Show, they had the ability to build raised stages to make it easier for the puppeteers to perform, but that's not usually an option when you're shooting in real-world locations, so they would often have to dig large rectangular pits for the puppeteers to stand in, and if the ground was going to be visible in a scene, they'd have to cover these pits with plywood, cover the plywood with dirt, cut holes in the plywood for the performers to stick their arms through, and they would have to perform basically in like a coffin. Like they're essentially buried alive, and they're watching their performances on monitors that were installed inside of the pit.
At that point, I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah, I'm not a puppeteer. And you're in there with like 4 or 5 other people. I mean, in that one scene towards the end of the movie where it's in the little desert ghost town, there's like a dozen people in the pit. Everybody better be wearing their deodorant that day. I'll tell you that much, because you're in real close quarters with a bunch of stinky puppeteers.
Yeah.
Some of the most difficult scenes to pull off were the ones where the Muppets drove or rode in cars. And, well, this is a road trip movie after all. So there's quite a few of those. The majority of the movie.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, the Muppets had never been filmed in an environment even close to this. So there was no real precedent for how to pull it off. The filmmakers and Muppeteers just had to kind of figure it out as they went along, basically just inventing new techniques along the way. So for the scenes in the Studebaker, for instance, they would have 4 puppeteers and their monitors smushed together in the front seat of the car, just under the dashboard, out of the view of the camera. The problem was, this arrangement didn't leave a lot of room for a driver. So Frawley's solution to this very unique problem was to rig the car so that it could be driven by a stunt driver who'd be sitting in the trunk of the car. So a stunt driver's driving from the trunk of the car, watching the road on a video monitor in the trunk.
And it's a little person stunt driver.
Is it?
So, yeah, it's.
I didn't see that part.
4 puppeteers, yeah.
Wow.
So it's a little person driving the car, and it's like, I guess it's like almost technically remote control,
because there's no brake and like gas pedal down there, right? They're just steering.
Right. Yeah, you're just steering. And then the puppeteers lie on the seat or the floor, and they don't see anything that's happening.
Yeah.
So, and then supposedly the first time they tested it, the monitor went out.
Oh no, his monitor, the driver's monitor,
the driver's monitor.
Oh, no.
So they're like talking to him through walkie-talkie, just being like, "All right, go a little left."
Oh no!
Right.
I would have stopped
Hold
and done another take, probably.
Yeah. Anyway, this is also how they do Vin Diesel scenes in Fast and Furious.
You mean Vin Diesel is driven by a little person?
A little Vin Diesel. It's
he-
actually a little Dom. It's in a tank top and like.
That's it.
Sitting in the
We're
trunk.
breaking news here on Cinema Shock. Vin Diesel turns out to be a Muppet.
Yep. There's a little person in his trunk.
That's so stupid, but fitting for this.
Oh man,
That's a very Muppet joke.
Yes, it is.
The great thing about this, what's so great is when you're watching the movie, you never question whether or not the Muppets are driving that Studebaker.
Yep.
Like it, you believe it. Like it, you fully believe it when you're watching the movie.
I've been preaching this the whole series. Like, it's just this kind of insanity is what made the Muppets real to me. Like when I'm a little kid,
How
watching
else
Sesame
could
Street
it
or
be
something.
happening?
Yeah, how else? Because of all the ways you could have done that, or that anybody else might have done that. How, I don't know. How about how every movie had done it before, or at least a lot of times before, like we're watching Psycho and she's driving a car and there's just a movie
rear
screen behind her.
projection. Yeah.
So it's just like, why not that?
But in order to fully bring the Muppets into the real world, you had to somehow establish that they're not in a studio with a rear projection screen behind them. And you had to see that car going down the road and visibly see Fozzie Bear behind the wheel of that car in like a wide shot. And that establishes that like, this is not like, they're not faking this. Like there's a Muppet driving a car right now, like you fully believe it. It's like when Superman, you'll believe a man can fly. Remember that tagline for the original Superman movie? This is like, you believe that a bear could drive a car. That should have been the tagline for the Muppet movie. So by far the most difficult scene to pull off was the opening sequence that we referenced earlier when Kermit is sitting on his log in the middle of a swamp singing Rainbow Connection. Now, the original plan for this was to shoot the scene on location in an actual swamp, but that idea was wisely scrapped, I think, in favor of a more controllable environment on the CBS Studios backlot. And the production took a set that had actually originally been constructed to be the lagoon for Gilligan's Island, and they transformed it into a realistic swamp, complete with real trees shipped in from the bayous of Georgia, which made me think they're probably from near Pogo's home of Okefenokee Swamp, right?
I'm sure they are. They've got to be, right?
They've got to be. That's the only part of Georgia that has that type of environment, right? Like South Georgia near Florida, right? Or like Savannah and stuff like that, but that's still pretty far south.
And maybe Jim, just to tie it all together, that's where he wanted to go to originally shoot this. But
maybe
you'd be dealing with a real Barney the alligator.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, that's probably why they decided this is not a great idea. So the plan was to sink a custom-made diving bell into the water with Jim inside of it. At the top of this diving bell, there was going to be a rubber sleeve that Jim could stick his arm through to perform Kermit. But the problem was the diving bell had been constructed when the plan was to shoot in an actual swamp, measured about 5 feet from top to bottom. But the water tank at the lagoon set was only 4 feet deep. So they had to modify the diving bell to remove about 18 inches from it so it wouldn't be visible from above the water. And that was going to make it an even tighter fit for the 6'3" Jim Henson to fit in. Now, once these changes were made, it was time to shoot the scene. Kermit and his log were positioned on top of the diving bell and lowered into the water. And Jim squeezed into the diving bell, sitting kind of like crisscross applesauce with a monitor and a copy of the script nestled between his legs. And he'd sit this way for like sometimes hours at a time. Like I know on one of the shoots, they said he was in there for like 4 or 5 hours. That was kind of the exception. Normally he'd get out and stretch a little bit, but I think they're like, we got to get this shot. He had to be helped out and like get, circulation back in his legs afterwards. Oof. Once he was inside of this thing, though, he could operate Kermit with his right arm, and he controlled Kermit's banjo strumming hand with a wire rod that was threaded into the diving bell. You can find some kind of schematics of this online. I'm not sure if they were original or somebody reconstructing them, but it's a pretty clear visual of what this kind of looked like. And all in all, it took about 5 days to complete filming on this sequence. And the result is, in my opinion, like one of the most perfect cinematic moments ever captured on film. Like to me, like when people describe movie magic, like this is kind of what they're talking about. Like just like you believe Fozzie's driving the bear, you believe that Kermit's just sitting in the middle of a swamp. It's hard to even fathom that there's a puppeteer underneath him underwater in a diving bell. Like that's insane to think about.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to the same thing with the Studebaker. It's like it's this insane like dedication to putting them in the real world. And I get that they wanted a real swamp, but there's never a point you don't buy that they're in a swamp.
It looks like a real swamp. I mean, that lagoon set is huge. Yeah. It goes way back, and like it honestly looks real if you don't know.
Well, they establish with like some overhead like shots,
helicopter shots,
and then you go in there, and then you've got Dom DeLuise like boating his way into the scene. So it's like, all right, well, this seems legit.
And you notice that Dom DeLuise's name is Bernie the Agent, which is of course a reference to Bernie Brillstein, Jim Henson's agent.
Yeah, nice.
Fun little in joke that not a lot of people would have gotten when they saw this movie in 1979.
But I think Jim Henson is a crazy person, but also
he's dedicated.
God bless him.
Dedicated.
God bless him, because you still would watch that and be this time again before reading up on it. He's got to be under the water, right? Like, how are they doing this? It's like how is Kermit doing this? And
I don't get it.
That's crazy.
Where does he get his banjo strings? That's the big question. Where's he shopping?
Listen, if you want to, I didn't know if now was the time to go into the real questions about the Muppet universe, but
no, we'll go into those later, maybe.
Okay, I was gonna say, because I got questions about the relationship to Kermit, his relatives, and the just acceptance of Barney the alligator eating people. Yeah, and just like, no, Barney, just hold on, no, leave him alone, Barney.
Well, you'll notice there are no other frogs nearby.
Yeah,
that's true.
So
that's what I'm saying. I don't know. It's weird.
So
do they have a problem with eating meat in general? Sorry, I'm just curious. Like, his frog legs, I get. Kermit would be bothered by that.
What about ham?
What about ham?
Well, I mean, but frogs are. Well, they eat insects, so I guess they are somewhat carnivorous, right?
Kermit talks to Barney as though they have a relationship, but it's
like they're neighbors.
Stop it. Barney is a murderer.
Yeah,
and
maybe they've got an understanding, Yeah. Maybe maybe Barney's just a fan of banjo tunes.
Like it's so weird to think about. Just that's how Barney is when he gets hungry.
Listen, when Barney's hungry.
I thought I was stupid for making D&D NPCs of the Muppets. This conversation's gone way off the rail.
Well, I'm just thinking, if you think about it logically,
I think these are valid questions, Gary.
Are the frog legs that are being cooked in this movie, are they being made from frogs with the same sentience as Kermit? because that's fucked up.
I mean, that's
because you're not just
that's what's implied because Kermit says that
they're on crutches.
He pictures them on tiny crutches. Yep.
Oh man.
So think of Tiny Tim on his little crutch in Muppet Christmas Carol.
God damn it! Don't do that to me, Justin.
It's fucked up when you think of it that way. Yeah, that's just. Also, no way a fast food chain exists that's frog legs.
It's just frog. Have you guys ever had frog legs?
Yeah, and it's gross to think about.
No,
but they taste good though.
Justin's a monster.
I don't like to eat. I in general, just as a rule, don't like to eat food that looks like what it looked like alive. And I know that that's not fair. I should probably have to do that. So
even like fish, like you wouldn't eat a whole. You only eat a whole fish.
I don't like it when the fish looks like a whole fish. You
like
know,
when it's got a head and everything.
Like when it's got the head, and all that stuff.
I get that. You don't want it winking at you.
I get it with like soft shell crab or like whatever when it's like the whole fucking crab just splayed out there. I think that's kind of gross looking.
Oh, man, soft shell crab is so good though. Can you tell I grew up in Louisiana eating crab and frog legs?
Eating Kermit and his friends.
Hey, I ate Barney the gator too.
Yeah.
Fried alligator is
good.
Huge. Yeah, it's delicious. All right, what are we talking about? Okay, we're talking about the Muppet movie. Another of the film's more memorable moments is the one where we see a full body shot of Kermit riding across the set on a bicycle. Another one of those, like, how the hell did they do this scene? As I mentioned briefly in our last episode, Kermit had first been seen riding on a bicycle in the Muppets Valentine's Show, that very first pilot for the Muppet Show that had been filmed, although that one was filmed on a soundstage, not on location like the scene from the Muppet movie would be. For the Valentine's Show special, a simple marionette had been used, but Jim wanted something more convincing for the film. And you can't really see like the bottoms of the wheels as good in that one because Kermit's behind some scenery and stuff, you know, so it's a little easier to pull off than it is here where it's literally out like on a dirt road. So the initial idea was to use a radio-controlled Muppet using technology similar to what had been used in Emmett Otter. They installed a remote control device on Kermit's bicycle between the front and back wheels, and just before it was time to film the scene, that thing broke, which forced the puppeteers to resort to a more old-fashioned method, and in the end, the scene was pulled off with a marionette, albeit a more sophisticated one than what had been used on the Valentine's Show. In this case, they had special effects supervisor Robbie Knott operating it from a crane lifted outside of the frame. So it took several attempts to get a convincing take. But I think there's no denying that the final product is nothing short of magical. Like, it's still one of those scenes where you're like, what? Kermit is... the only explanation is that Kermit's a living being who's learned to ride a bicycle. Like, you know...
Yeah.
There are some great outtakes of that. If you're watching this on Disney Plus, go to the extra section. There's a 2 or 3 minute video of them trying to get this right. And it was very difficult because... they're operating this from a crane. You got to think of the perspective of the crane, the guy operating it from the top of the crane. One of the biggest problems was that Kermit would often tilt one way or the other, and it didn't look convincing, or the wheels wouldn't be touching the ground. And if you watch the movie, and I paid attention to it today when I was rewatching it, there are a couple of moments in the scene, as good as it is, where you can see the back wheel lift an inch or two off the ground because the strings that were holding it had lifted it up a little bit, but it's subtle enough to where you have to really be looking for it. But it does happen.
You're invested enough in the movie that you're not noticing that.
No, you're more wowed by the idea of Kermit riding a bicycle because it's cool. Yeah. And of course, this becomes like a thing in the Muppet movies. Like they're going to up the ante on the bike riding in later movies, but because it was such a thing, even when the movie came out, it was such a big deal. Everyone was like blown away by it, as they should be, because it's still to this day, almost 50 years after the movie came out, it's still one of those things where you're like, this is better than any special effects in like a Marvel movie because I believe it. I know that those were created with a computer. This is like, you could see the texture on Kermit. You know that it's a real thing in the real world, and you just don't understand. Your brain can't understand how it's happening. You know,
it's just so wild to me. And then to add in the fact that there's humans, like even in this bike riding scene,
walking around in the background.
Yeah, there's people walking by. Mm-hmm. They're not paying it any mind. They don't care the frogs riding a bicycle.
No, it's them. Just every day. They just see this every day.
Yeah, this is just part of life. Muppets exist. Muppets
exist in this universe. Yeah, it's weird. I bet that they would be discriminated against in.
They probably would. There would be that. That's what Jim doesn't touch on is like the Muppet rights protests.
Yeah, the
going on in
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
And just let a A lot of the green hats marching on Washington. And I don't know. But I will say I did see cinematographer that guy what was his name, Isidore Menkovsky. He said he enjoyed working on the movie because the Muppets didn't complain ever. They never complained about light in their eyes.
They were just happy to be making a movie.
Yeah.
How long they had to do stand-ins or whatever. Like he was just like whatever. He's just like they're good. And
This is the easiest shoot of my life.
but he was joking about that, but then he also says like, but then if like he ever needed anything, it was also kind of creepy or like not creepy is not the word he used, but just interesting that like, you know, if Kermit needed to move to the right a little, it'd be like, I need Kermit to the right a little bit. And he's like, and it wasn't like Jim Henson would pop up and say, okay. It was like Kermit would respond.
Kermit would react.
Yeah, it would be like, okay, I'll move over.
That's great.
Like, how's this?
So both of those examples that we went over, Kermit on his log, Kermit on the bike, these are just two examples of Jim pushing the limits on what could be achieved with puppetry in this film. This movie is filled with other somewhat less showy moments of sophisticated puppetry that were unlike anything that had been attempted before. Another example, in the film's finale, when Animal eats a pill that causes him to grow to the size of a kaiju, instead of building a miniature town for a regular-sized animal to bust through, which would have been the easy way to do it, and the way that most filmmakers would have probably done it, Jim insisted on having an enormous 60-foot animal head built that Frank Oz could manipulate. Is that insane?
Where is it? Where is
I
it?
said the same
right
thing.
now?
I said the same thing when I watched it. I was like, oh, what is that in a museum somewhere? Where is this giant animal head? I want to see it. I also want to know how it was operated. I'm fascinated by it. But you see, you feel the scale of it in the movie. Yeah. I think like it feels it does.
I was watching it again, trying to do the same thing. How is this happening?
Yeah.
And all I could figure must be like you were talking about a rear projection. Like maybe there's animal on screen, you know? And the actors are up
but when
front.
they show Animal, like you can tell that it's not, by looking at it, you can see like the hairs on him and stuff. You can tell it's not just a close-up of the animal Muppet. It is bigger. It's you can tell it's in real life that it's huge. It's a huge piece of puppetry. And I think it just makes it cooler. You know, it makes a cooler scene. It's a great little finale. And I also want to know where that Muppet is because I would like to see it in real life.
Yeah, I was looking this up, and the best I could find was like on some Reddit thread, people were talking about it, and they were saying that like the latex or
deteriorated or something.
Yeah, that it probably had deteriorated by this point. They said that like the Muppets that they made with flocking, which we talked about in another episode, that material also didn't hold up over time as well. So a lot of times they would have to like rebuild.
Yeah. Makes
the
sense.
Muppets or whatever.
That makes sense.
But I want a 60-foot animal head. So.
Same. I want it like on my roof, like at all times, like staring at. Like,
another person responded on Reddit saying, "I think it's probably in his kid's toy box."
Well, for the film's finale, where the Muppets sing a song called "The Magic Store," Jim planned on featuring more than 250 Muppet characters, including the casts of Sesame Street, Emmett Otter, his Saturday Night Live sketches, as well as characters from his Tales of Muppet Land specials. Like pretty much every Muppet from the workshop. Like they were like, just bring them all. Like they're all going to be in this scene, and they all do show up. And it's really fun if you pause that scene to try to like pick out who all is in there because everyone seems to be in there. Now, in the past, when Jim had done big crowd scenes on the Muppet Show, a lot of the characters in the back rows were just stuck on rods without a puppeteer working them because they were just going to be in the background. They were just filling in space. But Jim, for this, was determined to have a puppeteer assigned to every single character. He wanted them all moving because he knew this was going to be projected on a big screen, not seen on a little television, and people would notice. So he wanted them all to be alive. So Jim puts out a casting call through the Puppeteers of America. He got nearly 150 performers that way, because who in the Puppeteers of America is not going to jump at the chance to be in the Muppet movie?
Right.
Who's not going to heed the call of Jim Henson? Like Jim Henson puts the bat signal up, but it looks like Kermit, and Puppeteers just start flocking to him, you know? So they got about 150 that way. Other characters were performed by the regular Muppet team, obviously. The Henson family, all the Henson kids were on this. Cheryl and Brian helped out on a few different scenes. Like I think Brian might have been Fozzie's right hand in the Studebaker because he was small and could squeeze down into that space easier, you know. I think Cheryl did the Kermit's legs in the scene, in the cowboy scene where he's got the little cowboy boots on, and where we just see the close-ups of his legs on the scene. I think she did that, but they helped in this scene as well. Members of the film crew, like anyone who was available, would get a puppet, and they brought in just a few outside friends, anyone who was willing to help, basically.
I typically get into the cast for the films that we cover, and I really fell down a rabbit hole. Some of the puppeteers that went uncredited were director John Landis, directed Animal House, Blues Brothers, American Werewolf in London, Trading Places, Michael Jackson's Thriller music video.
Oh, he also Manslaughterer.
Yes.
I was gonna say, I was like, just don't have him do your helicopter shots.
Let's not forget John Landis killed a man and a child and 2 children. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, and there was also a young up and coming Disney animator. You guys may have heard of Tim Burton was one of the yeah. And this one was another one that got me. Melinda Dillon. She's credited as Woman with Balloon. She's not one of the uncredited Muppet performers, but she's credited as Woman with Balloon. But she was nominated for 2 Oscars before she was the mom in Christmas Story. So like there's this movie, if you hadn't guessed, this movie is quite literally a who's who of Hollywood royalty, like the people in front of and behind the camera. There's tons and tons of people in this movie. We've just scratched the surface here, folks.
Melinda Dillon must have been a friend of somebody, because she was already well established she'd already been in Close Encounters of the Third Kind by this point, so she, and among other things, Slapshot, I think she's in, but she must have been somebody's friend.
I think so.
Yeah, she's just helping out. I mean, same with John Landis. I mean, he was already well established as a director by this point. He had not done Blues Brothers yet, but he had already done Animal House.
I saw that he did Grover a lot. Was he the regular Grover operator for
John Landis?
Yeah,
No.
I kept seeing him attached to Grover. I was like, what?
He was Gonzo in this scene.
Oh, was he? Okay.
He was Gonzo because Frank Oz had Piggy.
Yeah.
And so
Gonzo is normally Dave Goelz. So was Dave Goelz doing something else?
Yeah. I saw he did Gonzo somewhere in here. Now, I did find an interview with him from the New York Times where they asked him about being on the Muppet movie. And he says that what happened was he had a really good friend who was a publicist on the Muppet movie. And he said, I asked him to introduce me to Jim Henson and Frank Oz. He said when he was a kid, he was a puppeteer and he loved puppets. And so he did get to meet Henson and became close with him and Frank, which he says is why like Frank is in like 9 of his movies and Jim's in one of them. And
Frank's got that great cameo in Blues Brothers. Yeah.
And he says he's in 3 of their movies. His quote here is he said, what happened was in the end scene, they had all of the Muppet characters in this big pit. And Frank, who was up front doing Piggy, asked if I would do, oh, wait, you're right. Here it is. It's in this fucking quote I got right here. He says, what happened was in the end scene, they had all the Muppet characters in this big pit. And Frank, who was up front doing Piggy, asked if I would do Grover. And it was such an honor.
There you go.
And so, so I mixed up my 2 things there. So it was Grover, not Gonzo. And he said, he also goes on to say in that interview, he said, 30 years later, I was in a restaurant in Beverly Hills and I got introduced to Tim Burton. And I said, like, hey, nice to meet you. And he said that Tim said, hey, we've already met. We were both in the pit on the Muppet movie. He's like, I only knew who you were because everybody around me was just being like, that's the guy who directed fucking Animal House.
Tim Burton was probably like 22 years old or something at the time.
Oh yeah. He was like, I think he said Tim told him like at that time he was like in the animator / puppeteers union or something and got pulled in there.
That's cool. Now, we've been talking a lot about how this movie got made, and one thing we haven't really touched on much is the human cast. And that's because there just aren't that many of them, at least in terms of significant characters, The only characters of prominence in the film are the villain, Doc Hopper, played by Charles Durning, giving nearly the exact same performance that he would give as Pappy O'Daniel in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou more than 2 decades later. Like the exact performance, same suit, I think. And then there's Max, Hopper's chauffeur, played by Austin Pendleton, who from some interviews I've read with Austin Pendleton, seems to have been pretty miserable during his time on set. Like he kind of talks shit about it, like about how rough of a shoot it was. But his misery seems to be more of the exception than the rule, as nearly everyone else who was involved in the movie. Granted, this could all be them talking about it in hindsight, and maybe they were having a rough time at the time, and now they talk about it like it was all, roses and whatever. But everyone seems to have fond memories of it. I mean, they do admit that it was an incredibly tough shoot because they were doing something that had literally never been done before, but everyone also seemed to know that they were creating something special, and spirits usually remained high even when things got tough. The few times that there were disagreements, they were usually of an artistic nature. In his biography on Jim Henson that we mentioned earlier, author Brian J. Jones gives one example where Jim and Oz disagreed about Doc Hopper's ending in the story. Jim was convinced that deep down, Hopper wasn't a bad guy and should be redeemed at the end of the movie. He said, this is a quote from Jim, he says, "Even the most worldly of our characters is innocent. Our villains are innocent, really. And it's that innocence, I think, that is our connection to the audience." Oz's response to that was simple. This is another exact quote, by the way, from Oz. He said, "Bullshit." And as anyone who's seen the movie knows, Oz won that argument, and Hopper remains unredeemed.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, he has mass murdered many of Kermit's relatives.
Right.
So.
I think it's better the way that they play it, honestly. I think that it's funnier because Kermit gives this big speech, and it ends with, like, I guess if if none of this is working, if none of this is, connecting with you, I guess you should just kill me now. Something along those lines, And Doc Hopper, the way Charles Durning plays it, he looks like he's having a moment of thought, like he's actually going to decide, oh no, I've had a change of heart, to do the Grinch thing where his heart grows 3 sizes bigger.
Yeah.
And he has this look in his eyes, and then he just looks up and he goes, "Okay, boys, kill him." It's really funny to me because it's like a fake out. And then that's when the animal thing happens with the giant animal. But I think it's funnier that way to keep him being a bad guy. And he never really gets an ending beyond that, though, does he? He just kind of runs away.
Yeah, animal pops out of the roof, and like the entire
everyone runs.
All the bad guys run away.
They just scatter. Yeah, and that's it. That's the end of it.
Leave it to Animal to save the day.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Dave Grohl Animal drum battle? Because that was pretty great.
Oh, yeah, like on YouTube or whatever?
Yeah. I just stumbled across it the other day, and I hadn't seen it, but they were just like, and I was just like, now we find out who really best. And Dave Grohl's just like at his drum set. He's like, hits the hi-hat, and he's like, ding. He's like, oh, did you hear that? Was that a bell? School's in session.
I love Animal. Well, another thing that most people remember from the film is the total barrage of cameos throughout. A lot of these cameos come kind of early on. I think you get 5 or 6 of them in the El Slizo Cafe scene alone, but they continue throughout the entire film, all the way up into the final act that features none other than Orson Welles as a Hollywood mogul named Lou Lord, an obvious nod to Lord Lou Gray, the man who had helped the Muppet Show and now the Muppet movie come to be.
Orson Welles may be lost on some of our younger listeners, but like huge iconic figure in Hollywood acting. Orson Welles had already been nominated for 4 Oscars and won 2.
Well, not just in the world of Hollywood acting, I mean, directing.
Yeah.
He literally directed Citizen Kane, the greatest movie of all time.
If you're a fan of movies, I don't think you get away with not knowing who Orson Welles is, director of what is considered the greatest film of all time.
Yeah. So it's kids. If you're listening, go look up Orson Welles.
Watch Citizen Kane. Watch The Third Man. Watch The Magnificent Ambersons. The man is one of the most talented people to ever walk the face of the planet. Also incredibly difficult.
That is not hyperbole, any of that.
No,
when Jennifer and I watched, legitimately, like, it's probably been 1.5 years, 2 years ago now, but we decided to rewatch Citizen Kane. It's a little long, but like, just to see again and remember it, and it's still really, really good.
And Gary, he was 25 fucking years old when he made that movie. Does that piss you off?
I'm gonna jump out my window.
25 years old when he made that movie, and I've seen that movie. I don't know how many times I've seen that movie. The first time I watched it was after it had already been named AFI's #1 American movie of all time. And I was like, well, that's a lot to live up to. And I remember watching it for the first time and going, well, shit, like, I guess they're right. This is like for something to live up to that kind of hype, being called the greatest of all time, then you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, I get it. Like that was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. It says a lot, and I would love to do honestly love to do an Orson Welles series on this show one day, because not only because I would love to talk about Citizen Kane because the story behind that movie is amazing, but the rest of this, because of what happened on that film and it trying to be buried by William Randolph Hearst and all that, it kind of led to him almost being blacklisted, sort of semi-blacklisted, and it made it very difficult for him to get other movies made. But he's just a fascinating figure, fascinating career, really good stuff. Anyway, I got off on a Orson Welles tangent. Sorry.
Well, and then
you mentioned Orson Welles, and I can't help myself.
Yeah. No, and I can't help but think of telling people about Citizen Kane and also
the Transformers movie.
Well, yeah, it's the Transformers movie. That's a good one. Now, I was going to say the outtakes you can find on YouTube of him doing that Paul Masson wine.
Yeah.
Where he's like actually drinking the wine.
Clearly
and
drunk.
He is just fucking drunk off his ass, like doing lines on those commercials, and it is insanity.
Remember when Jodorowsky tried to get him to be the Emperor in Dune, and the way that he convinced him to do the movie is that Jodorowsky committed to hiring the chef at Orson Welles' favorite French restaurant to be his personal chef on set. Because Orson Welles, I don't know if you've seen him in this movie. Big guy, love food, big appetite on that guy. So that convinced him and he signed on. Of course, the movie never got made. Go listen to our Jodorowsky series for more on that.
Anyway, Todd's like, I've been saving up for this moment of the cast. You're not you won't let me talk about this goddamn cast.
All right, so
no, it's good. It's good.
Should have saved Orson Welles for last, baby.
So other cameos in the film, but other than Orson Welles, include Milton Berle, Mel Brooks, James Coburn, Dom DeLuise, Elliot Gould, Bob Hope, Madeline Kahn, Carol Kane, Cloris Leachman, Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, Telly Savalas, and Paul Williams himself, as I mentioned earlier, as the El Sleazo pianist. Do you guys have a favorite cameo?
I really like Bob Hope.
The ice cream vendor?
Yeah. Just for the simple fact of him handing Fozzie the 2 ice cream cones and it's just like, now don't mix them up.
Mine's 100% pissy ass Steve Martin waiting.
Oh God, yes.
Oh yeah, and the shorts. The shorts. Yeah. It's the most extended cameo probably in the film.
Yeah,
because he gets the whole scene, and he comes back a couple times later on. But yeah, he has such disdain in his eyes.
He does. He's like such an asshole. But it's so funny, hilarious to me.
I think part of the reason we connect with Steve Martin as the waiter, as the maitre d', is because we've all worked service industry, and he kind of puts out that air that we all want to, of just like, thank you. Okay, we're done. Thank you. Yeah. It's, you can serve us now. Oh, may I?
I also love Carol Kane. One, because I love Carol Kane, but also that recurring joke. It only comes up a couple times, but
yeah,
where they say myth. Yeah, but she's my myth. Yeah. They do it again later when they come across the billboard, and it is so funny to me. Yeah, it's such a silly joke, and I just can't help but laugh. And I love Carol Kane. She's wonderful.
I can't say much because legitimately my favorite joke was and still is the fork in the road. Just
Kermit.
Just Kermit's reaction to it, just like, it's the fork in the road. The attorney is just like, I can't believe that. It's just so good.
It is good.
But I was gonna say Cheryl Henson in that oral history does mention that the person that she thought like galvanized everyone, because a lot of these people are like were or will be or whatever guests with like the Muppet Show or have had some connection to Muppets in the past.
Yeah, a lot of them are on season 2 of the show. Like I know Dom DeLuise. I know Milton Berle was on there. Like a lot of them were on season 2, and some of them would be. I don't know if Richard Pryor ever was.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But she was saying David Laser's the guy that like
Schmoozed him.
Schmoozed him, said that
Yeah.
he was like the best host and would go out of his way to like remember their birthdays, their kids, like everything.
Even after they were on the
invited them
show.
Yeah, even after they were on the show, invited them to come see other shows. Said he was just like perfect at like making all of them feel special. So it created this like they all felt like family to the Muppets. So it was like easy to get the cameos out of them later.
Yeah. There was one other tidbit that I saw, and it was in the scene at the car lot with Milton Berle. There was another Muppet, but it just turned out to be Milton Berle's cock.
Wow. What is that?
What just happened?
Is that a reference to something that I don't understand? Is it?
I know. I was like taking a drink. I had a spit take. I was just like, wait, what?
That felt like the Aristocrats. like just any joke just ended with it, and it was Milton Berle's cock.
It just turned out to be Milton Berle's cock.
Milton Berle's cock just came out of left field. It feels like it was just like what just happened there?
You haven't heard that? You haven't heard that rumor that Milton Berle's like hung like a horse?
No, I've heard it about Willem Dafoe.
Really?
Oh yeah, like on Antichrist, they had to get a dick like a stand-in because his was so big that it freaked everyone out.
Okay, so everybody,
I did Google it, and the very
I'm not
first thing,
Googling Milton Berle's cock. I'm sorry, that is not going on my search history.
Well, to be fair, I'm classier than that. I Googled Milton Berle's penis.
All right, I'm gonna use DuckDuckGo so that nobody's tracking this shit.
The first thing is an article called "The Legend of Milton Berle's Supposedly Giant Dick."
That's just the name of his autobiography.
There were two pits. Like there was one for the puppeteers, and then one for when Milton Berle wanted to lay down on his stomach. They had to dig a
wow
for his cock.
Wow.
I
learned.
We
I
already
learned something
covered.
today.
We've already covered Rodney Dangerfield's balls. Anyone who spent any private time with Rodney saw them, said comic Harry Basil, who opened for Dangerfield in Vegas for 10 years. He was only comfortable in a bathrobe, but he never tried to shut it all the way and never wore underwear. So the boys just kind of hung out to catch some air. They were exceptionally low-hanging, like a grandfather clock.
Well, now I've learned two things.
You have. Wow.
Oh man. All right. We gotta move on. We gotta get out of this. I don't know how to segue past that, so we're just gonna keep on rolling. It's really hard to segue into this next section after that. Considering what the next section is. Well, yeah, maybe I could just talk about how much I like Mel Brooks's cameo. Mel Brooks's cameo is also great.
Oh, hilarious.
He's so funny in this. It's it's a very Mel Brooks character.
Oh,
you know,
very.
like it's a very like it feels like they just let him do whatever he wanted to do, and he decided to play a Nazi, maybe
Nazi
German.
scientist.
Yeah, definitely German, maybe former Nazi. I also love the way that the little hat fits over Kermit's entire face.
Yes.
Oh yeah, but it becomes a Mel Brooks movie, right? Well, he even has on his jacket. He has like DOC for like Doc, like which I think in Blazing Saddles he's the governor and has like GOV on the back.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's a very Mel Brooks scene. It almost feels like that scene is directed by Mel Brooks. But then you also get, is that the scene where you also get Piggy in a fight scene? You get a Piggy karate chopping a bunch of rednecks. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. So while we're talking about cameos, maybe the most special cameo, at least to the Muppet performers, was the one by Edgar Bergen. So if you listen to the first episode of this Jim Henson series, then you may recall that Bergen was one of Jim's earliest childhood heroes, one that in a way inspired him to become a performer. Bergen was a ventriloquist who had appeared on a popular radio show called the Chase and Sanborn Hour, along with his dummy, Charlie McCarthy. Now, Edgar's daughter was Candace Bergen, Murphy Brown herself. Candace Bergen. She had been a guest on the first season of The Muppet Show and had suggested to her father that he make a visit to the show as well. She had a great time. So she's like, you should do this. And obviously, he's into puppets. Edgar Bergen appeared on season 2 of The Muppet Show as a guest host, and his visit had been nothing short of monumental for the Muppet performers. Like, this was their Elvis. Like, this is like Elvis coming to visit a bunch of musicians. You know, like, this was a big deal to all of these guys because they idolized him.
Mm-hmm.
When it came time to shoot the Muppet movie, Jim once again asked Bergen to make a small cameo along with Charlie as the judge of the beauty pageant that's won by Miss Piggy. Bergen agreed despite being in poor health at the time. And the footage of Bergen in the film ended up actually being the last footage ever shot of the performer, who passed away just a few weeks later at the age of 75. And if you watch the movie towards the end credits, you'll see that it is dedicated to Bergen's memory. Or actually, it's dedicated to the memory and magic of Edgar Bergen there at the very end.
Pretty incredible. And apparently all of the performers and like especially Jim Henson, like they viewed that as like it was almost like passing the mantle.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal for them.
So the shoot on the Muppet movie was completed in October of 1978, and Jim and his crew immediately started working overtime to generate buzz for the film. In April of 1979, the Muppets became the first non-humans to host The Tonight Show, and they were so well received that there were actually rumors, or at least there was chatter, that if Johnny Carson, who he was having contract disputes at the time, if he didn't come back to the show, maybe the Muppets can just take it all over. So the whole show, I mean, Kermit is technically the host, but other Muppets are on there. You can find it on YouTube. But yeah, an entire hour-and-a-half episode of The Tonight Show hosted by Kermit the Frog. It's great.
That'd be incredible.
Yeah. Henson also put together a variety show called The Muppets Go Hollywood, which aired in May of 1979 to help promote the upcoming film, which premiered 6 weeks later. I had a chance to watch The Muppets Go Hollywood this week as well. It's also on YouTube. It's not great quality, but the whole thing is on there. It's fun. It's weird because it's like they're at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And there's kind of this whole red carpet thing hosted by Dick Van Dyke for some reason. But the Muppets come in cars, one at a time, like you would, along with other celebrities. There's all kinds of other. Wow. It's all very like late 70s celebrities, you know.
Nice.
But it feels like one of those like.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, it feels like one of those like Oscar pre-shows or something.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's super weird.
And then the show itself is set inside of the Coconut Grove, and there are like performances on the stage, you know, like musical performances and stuff, as well as interactions in the audience and a couple of segments. Like there's an interview segment with Miss Piggy where she's like poolside, and there's actually a really good behind the scenes thing with Paul Williams and Asher and Kenny Asher talking about writing Rainbow Connection, and you get to hear them like sitting at a piano and singing it, and so that's kind of the only behind the scenes bit on it. The rest of it is more almost played like an episode of the Muppet Show, but not with skits, but a stage variety show. It's worth checking out. It's fun. It's a cute little thing. The Muppet movie had its royal premiere in London on May 31st, 1979, and opened in a limited release on June 22nd here in the U.S. before being rolled out across the U.S. and Canada over the next few weeks. And the film received incredibly positive reviews from critics, like almost across the board positive reviews. And one of my favorite quotes from Roger Ebert's review, he said, "If you can figure out how they were able to show Kermit pedaling across the screen, then you are less romantic than I am. I prefer to believe that he did it himself." So if you feel the same way that Roger Ebert does, sorry for ruining it for you. You know, even that snippy little bitch, Rex Reed, seemed to enjoy this film.
What?
Writing that, yeah, right? He wrote that if there's any doubt, the Muppet movie will make believers and fans out of the worst pessimists, referring to himself, of course. These lovable characters are so real and so endearing that I was never aware of the human hands making them work from mysterious hiding places. The Muppets made a wide-eyed child out of me, and I hope that they continue to do so until I'm in my wheelchair.
And his heart grew 3 sizes that day.
That's beautiful, though. Even Rex Reed, he's like, I do appreciate that all these people are just embracing the magic.
We love
the Muppets.
The Muppets. All right, so let's talk a little. I want to hear your experience with like the Muppet movie. Like, what is it about? I mean, I've gathered from our talks and everything, and from this episode, that we're all big fans of this movie. I don't think anyone's going to criticize much about it. So what I'm really curious about is, what is it about the Muppet movie that works so well for you? Like, what is it about this movie that you like really connect to? Like, what is it about this movie that makes it so magical to you?
Well, I said a little bit earlier, like the idea of friends in a car going cross country chasing their dream is such a wholesome, relatable thing. It's timeless, but the difference between 4-year-old and 41-year-old Todd is I think I have an appreciation for like all the cameos and the type of humor now. Before it was just kind of like, oh, they're driving a car and Kermit's riding a bicycle and they're outside and you can tell that they're outside.
But it works on all of those levels though. Like
that's the thing. It works on every level. And yeah, it probably, I don't, nothing I haven't said already before at length and probably while choking back tears. It's just a wholesome slice of a great elevated form of artistry and pop culture ever. So yeah, I'm losing my words. I'm sorry, fellas.
No, it's okay. I think I'm actually like on the same page with you in a lot of ways. Like I feel as though it's weird. Like as a kid, I was fascinated by them. Just fascinated by Muppets in general and just how they work and what is this? And then the humor was dumb, but at the time I thought it was very funny. Somewhere along the way, I became like an adult and did all this other stuff. And then now I'm back on this side of adulthood. And I like it for all the same reasons, because they're fascinating. And I'm fascinated by how they did the things that they did. So maybe I'm more fascinated on a technical level. And all the humor is silly, but it's fun. And we live in a world where, I don't know, there was a moment where I was all in on edgelord comedy. And I mean, have made jokes on this show that are edgelord comedy, so I get it. Okay, I still have it in me. I'm not saying I don't, but my regular life, my real world, is a world where there is constant political fighting and bullshit stuff happening on Earth that, like, just a silly show, like if you can embrace just the silliness of it and the humor of it, that's one thing that you can love, but also the wholesomeness of it, like you said, which is like, I think of it in a way that, like, I don't want to go off on another tangent, but like I think of it in the way that, like, I watched like the most recent like Superman movie trailer come out and I was like, wow, this is a trailer that I think me 15 years ago would have been like, what are you doing? This is the dumbass Superman. And me now is like, that's the Superman I want.
That's the Superman we need. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I want to see. And I feel that way with the Muppets a little bit, like that I think, because you're saying like chasing your dreams, which is part of what they're doing. But the bigger part of that to me is that it's not even like Kermit's going to chase his dream. He is, but his dream is just to make people happy.
Yes,
and
that's it.
It's not like to be. They make a whole thing about the rich and famous thing, but like,
yeah,
Kermit just wants to like entertain people and just have fun. And
well, he knows that the rich and famous thing gets him in front of the millions of people that Dom DeLuise mentions at the beginning of the movie. So that's
you can make millions of people happy. Mm-hmm. Like,
and I think that's Jim Henson. Like, I think that's
100%. Yeah.
What he's after. And so like he's in all these avenues and inserting himself into all these different places and working his ass off and gonna just kill himself to do all of this. And it's just like at the end of the day, like his main goal was just he just wanted to make stuff that made people happy.
Yeah, because you hear like in interviews with Jim Henson, he never liked discussing the Muppets in monetary terms. Like when people would ask him like how much is Henson Associates or Henson Productions worth, or how much are the Muppets worth, he never wanted to talk about that because that wasn't important to him. I mean, it let him buy a lot of cool cars, which he was really into, but like that wasn't the goal for him. The goal for him was to create something that people would enjoy. And I think that's why he felt uncomfortable talking about the money side of it, because that wasn't the ultimate reason that he was doing it.
Yeah.
It was to make people happy, like you're saying.
Yeah, it's just the Muppet movie. I mean, I if I have to say something, like the most controversial thing I think I could say right now is that I don't think that this is my favorite Muppet movie. And I think that that's like a unpopular opinion.
I think most people our age or even younger would state I think The Muppet Christmas Carol is easily the most popular Muppet movie. I don't think it's not my favorite, and I adore it, but I think overall. So what I'm saying is I don't think that's a controversial statement, because I think a lot of people would say The Muppet Christmas Carol is their favorite, which Jim Henson wasn't even involved with.
I watched The Muppet Christmas Carol this past Christmas, and I didn't think this movie was as good as A Muppet Christmas Carol personally. But also, I'm still hanging on to, I grew up on having the VHS tapes of Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan, so I'm interested to see those again, because it's been a long time.
And you've got that nostalgic, like, connection.
Yeah, so I agree that I could be just nostalgic for those, so I want to see them, like, comparison-wise, but just that I watched The Muppet Christmas Carol, and then I watched this one, and I'm like, Muppet Christmas Carol is like a little zippier, and like I think it's like funnier, has like some cool gags in it, stuff like that. Like I like it a lot.
See, I really enjoy the scrappiness of this one. I like that 70s rough around the edges like feel
but there is
to this
that
one.
cool. Yeah,
you know, I just like
yeah, that makes sense.
There's something about that. It feels very unique to me, especially considering you're putting puppets into that. Because this feels like a very 70s. It feels like a very 1979 movie.
Well, even now, as you say that, like, not to step on that point, but now as you say that, it makes me think too, like, oh, this one was more ambitious than The Muppet Christmas Carol too. So I don't know if I could say that anymore, because actually, as I'm thinking it through, I'm like, there's more happening in this movie, and like a broader scope of like stuff is happening in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the cast of Muppets in Muppet Christmas Carol is probably much bigger than this one, but it was all filmed on sound stages and things like that. But which fits the story. So I don't think you have to choose between one or the other, to be honest. I think they're both great, and they both feature Paul Williams songs, and they both feature the best music of any of the Muppet movies, because Paul Williams, his stuff just works with the Muppets so well, Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I think that there are a lot of reasons why this movie works as well as it does, and there's obviously the incredible artistry of the puppets themselves on display, the performances from Jim and his puppeteers, the jokes, which I love I love dumb puns, so the jokes really hit for me. The songs, obviously, which we've talked about a lot, are a big part of what works so well. But beyond all of that, I do think that there are things that resonate about this movie beyond the surface level, which goes into kind of what the territory that you guys were both talking about. And I think this is a movie, it's really a movie about found family. It's a movie about this kid, this lonely, talented guy who sets out to follow his dreams. And along the way, it's not just about him following his dreams, but along the way, he finds a bunch of other weirdos and misfits that become a part of his tribe. Like people who maybe back home in the swamp, there weren't people that got him, that understood him, because we see him alone. When we see him in the swamp, there's nobody else around. There aren't any other frogs around. There's nobody else there. It's just Kermit sitting at home strumming his banjo alone on a log, right? I think this is, in a way, it's the story of Jim Henson, like you said. This is almost a biography of Jim Henson in a very abstract way, about this guy wanting to make millions of people happy, and he comes from the backwoods of Mississippi, and made his way to Hollywood. This kind of goes back to Michael Fritz's quote earlier in the episode where he kind of cracked the code of what the movie was about, of the heart of the movie, saying this is a movie about the Muppet performers. It's about a bunch of folks from all different walks of life with all different life experiences who find something to bond over and that they're all into. It's kind of about finding those friends who are the same kind of weird that you are. None of the characters that we see here are ever seen like with their families. I noticed this time watching it. Now, obviously, there are other later Muppet movies where we see their families. We meet Robin, we meet Fozzie's mom, we meet other family members later. But here, they're all solitary folks who are looking for connection. Fozzie doesn't seem to have any friends at the El Slizo Cafe. Everyone seems to hate him. Piggy doesn't seem to have anyone there when she's doing her thing. Sweetums doesn't seem to have anyone there other than his boss, who's kind of a dick. And you see Kermit, again, alone in his swamp. So Kermit has to leave home, leave his comfort zone in order to find a family that allows him to thrive and to shine and to be who he is clearly meant to be, because he's clearly a very talented dude. And he finds other oddballs, each who have their own talents. They bring all of their own stuff to the table, and all of their talents complement his talents. So it really is a journey about finding yourself, about finding your meaning, and finding the people to help you achieve that. And that's very much the story of Jim Henson finding Frank Oz and finding Jerry Jewell and finding Jerry Nelson and all these guys and creating this thing that eventually led them to Hollywood, just like in the movie. It led them to the big screen. And I think that's a really fascinating. I think it was intentional. I think it was 100% intentional, at least part of it. I think when Jim Henson and Jerry Jewell and Jack Burns and Dave Goelz and Richard Hunt and all these guys sat down to create this story, I think they knew exactly what they were doing, because this is a story that they had lived. And they were putting that into these characters that they had created. They'd gone through all the trials and difficulties of getting to Hollywood. It may have been the SNL writers' room that they were having to face, and not, Doc Hopper and his frog leg empire. But they faced trials nonetheless. But in the end, they made it to Hollywood. They made it to the Magic Store. And that's what this movie is about, is just finding those people who get you and compliment you, and you lift each other up. Because otherwise Fozzie would still be back at the El Slizo bombing every night. Right? But he found the guy who lifted him up, and in turn, he lifted Kermit up, and they complimented each other. And I think that is a very good story to tell. I think that's a very good lesson to learn from anything, is that just you might be you might be a little weirdo who thinks you don't have any friends, but I promise you there's somebody out there who is the same kind of weird that you are, that you can be friends with. They just might not be in your school or in your neighborhood or whatever, but I promise they are out there. There are a lot of weirdos out there, like you guys.
I was about to say, are we describing ourselves?
This is what Cinema Shock Plus people are. This is what the Cinema Shock family is.
Yeah.
Just finding people who are into the same kind of stuff that you are. I mean, that's obviously that's below the surface level, but I think it is very obvious, and I think it's very intentional. I think when they were creating this movie, they on some level knew that they were telling their own story. But if you watch this on a surface level, you get the great jokes, you get the songs that'll there's not a bad song in this movie. Yeah. Every single one of the songs that Paul Williams wrote for this movie is very good. Every single one of them. It's a great album to listen to, because there's not a skippable track on it. So the Muppet movie was, unsurprisingly, a resounding success. It brought in over $65 million at the box office on an $8 million budget, proving that the Muppets were one of the most popular pieces of pop culture to come along in years, and paving the way for more Muppet projects. The next one of those projects was the follow-up to the Muppet movie, and this time, Jim Henson would be the man in the director's chair. That movie, and the subject of our next episode, is 1981's The Great Muppet Caper.
Oh.
I know Gary's excited. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I haven't seen The Great Muppet Caper since I was a kid. I rewatched the Muppet movie every few years, so I've seen it a lot more. I rewatch the Christmas Carol every year, I think. But Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan, I have not seen either of those since I was a kid, so I'm very excited to rewatch them.
I'm kind of with Gary in that, oddly, Muppet Caper, Great Muppet Caper, and Muppets Take Manhattan were in more rotation for me, like either with the VHS or recorded off of television or whatever, rather than the Muppet movie. So I actually know those two better than this one. But again, I'm kind of in the same boat where it's been years since I've watched them. But so I am interested to revisit them. I'm pumped.
It's gonna be fun.
I know that I'm gonna have some nostalgia and sentimental value. I remember grandparents getting me Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan, and then like just having those tapes. So I'm gonna have to work through that and decide what is it really good or not. But but it's fun because I legitimately I don't think like those are movies it's not like I own them on DVD. I didn't. I haven't seen them since VHS, and so and I think I still literally have the VHSs, but I have the 4K of Manhattan, but I haven't watched it yet. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get into those two and see how they hold up still after all this time.
Should be fun. So join us on our next episode for that. I think that's all we got, guys. Once again, join Cinema Shock Plus at cinemashock.net/plus for a bunch of bonus content and to help support the show.
Oh, it's good this time. We just went through it. You gotta get in there.
Some good further viewing, some good Star Trek picks, somebody needs a nap stuff. Like we had all kinds of stuff in our bonus episode this week.
Todd threw up on camera.
Well, where can you guys be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horn on all the things.
My show, Computer Resume Podcast, covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order, is available everywhere and at Computer Resume on all the socials and Patreon. If you like stand-up comedy or if you like Dungeons and Dragons, I host monthly comedy shows as well as an actual play called D's 20, where various performers play D&D in front of a live audience. Info and tickets are available at eventbrite.com, and D's 20 is now on Instagram at Ds20Live. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
Start giving Todd a 60-second limit on his plugs.
Half of Todd's plugs need to be on Cinema Shock Plus.
Yeah. Start charging him ad time.
I know, right?
Well, I am at Justin_Bishop on Letterboxd, Instagram, and X, which I don't really use anymore because I'm more over at Blue Sky. I'm Justin Bishop, no underscore on Blue Sky. Cinema Shock, no underscore on Blue Sky, or cinema_shock on the other places. Cinemashock.net for all the stuff, all the merch, the links to Discord. You can find a link to Cinema Shock Plus there. You can find all of our episodes. You can find other things there. Cinemashock.net.
Way to sell it.
That's just the home. It's the hub for all things Cinema Shock. You can find everything there. If you're wondering what we look like, our pictures on there. Unless you're on Cinema Shock Plus, then you're watching us on video right now.
Yeah.
Everybody wave.
Hey, everybody.
Gary, you need to say something or it's not going to.
Oh, I can put us in gallery view. Hang on.
No, and it doesn't matter. That's the end of the episode.
Oh, okay.
I ain't saying shit.
Well, until next time.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Hare Krishna has the keys.
Oh my God, that's such a good running joke.
I love that gag.
Good grief, it's a running gag.